He was the son of the brilliant military strategist whose gamble cost their nation everything, leaving them as penniless prisoners of war. Now, forced into hard labor by their brutal conquerors, this young boy is about to prove that his father's legendary knowledge didn't die with the empire. 2 years ago, the land of East Asia fell in absolute defeat. Its surviving citizens dragged away in chains and forced into a massive, walled underground prison camp known as Anagura. Among them is Raika, a young boy carrying a heavy wooden barrel through the bustling, dirt-covered streets of the enclosure. He glances back at an altar with burning incense inside a dim room before heading out into the harsh environment. Deep within the construction zones of Sector 2, a massive commotion breaks out among the adult laborers and their overseers. The workers stand in utter disbelief, staring down at a massive grid of perfectly cut stone blocks. Just yesterday, they had only managed to drill basic pilot holes, yet overnight, the entire field of massive boulders has been neatly sliced apart. Even stranger, the stone isn't scorched or shattered. It is completely soaked with water. Crouching down, an elderly worker named Grandpa looks at the damp surface and realizes this wasn't done with iron wedges, but with a clever ancient trick using expanding wooden pegs soaked in water. Before the confusion can boil over, Raika walks by, catching the old man's attention. Grandpa immediately stops the boy, demanding to know if he stayed up all night in the freezing cold just to pour water into the wooden wedges. Raika modestly tries to wave it off, explaining he simply read about the technique in an old book. He explains that ancient people used this exact method to split boulders much larger than these, harnessing the terrifying, expanding force of waterlogged wood. Deeply moved by the boy's selfless late-night hustle, Grandpa smiles warmly and forces a precious bundle of wrapped rice cakes into Raika's hands as a reward. Raika is hesitant to accept such a valuable treat, but the old man insists, telling him that what he did for everyone was truly magnificent. The surrounding workers watch in admiration, noting how incredibly kind the people of East Asia truly are. But their peaceful moment is cut short. The prison camp belongs to the Northern Nations, a ruthless empire that forces the captives into backbreaking labor from sunrise to sunset under the watchful eyes of armed guards on the walls. Raika walks away from the crowd and sits on a dirt ledge to finally enjoy his snack. While Raika sits on the ground taking a bite of his food, two younger children step out from the shadows, staring at his treat with wide, starving eyes. Smiling warmly, Raika stops eating and gently holds out the leaf-wrapped treats to share them. Suddenly, a heavy stone flies through the air, striking Raika dead in the forehead with a brutal crack. A group of older East Asian captives approaches, led by a smug, arrogant youth named Gashin. Instead of thanking Raika for helping the community, Gashin sneers, accusing the boy of being a pathetic outsider trying to buy everyone's favor. He aggressively steps into Raika's face, loudly mocking his father, the fallen military strategist, blaming him entirely for leading East Asia straight into defeat. Gashin barks that a strategist's job is a gamble of karma, where winning makes you a hero, but losing makes you a despised failure. Raika's eyes narrow as he silently kneels down to pick up his scattered rice cakes from the dirt. Gashin takes his silence as cowardice, laughing wickedly and asking if the brat wants to fight. But Raika isn't looking for a brawl. He is looking for absolute payback. With a cold, calculated glare, Raika points out that his father fought to protect the people until his very last breath, and he will never forgive anyone who calls him a traitor. Seizing the strategic initiative, Raika acts instantly and begins screaming at the top of his lungs, faking a massive crying fit and loudly begging Gashin not to beat him up. The sudden, explosive shouting immediately draws the sharp gaze of a heavily armed northern guard standing watch on the wall above. Infuriated and panicked by the noise, Gashin lunges forward and tightly grabs Raika by the collar to muffle his mouth, but the trap has already sprung. The guard barks a harsh command for the slacking workers to get back to work immediately. The guard's intervention forces a panicked Gashin to flee while swearing vengeance. Raika watches him run with a smug, satisfied smirk, knowing his wit is far sharper than any fist. He happily passes the remaining rice cakes to the two hungry children. Though he possesses the rare gift of literacy and knowledge inherited from his late father, Raika knows he is still an isolated outsider among his own people. destined to walk a dangerous path inside the walls of Anagura. Stepping inside the grim, shadow-drenched confines of the camp mortuary, Raika immediately clutches his nose to block out the overwhelming stench of decay hanging heavy in the air. Rows of motionless corpses lay stretched out on wooden slabs, completely covered under pale linen sheets. Raika bows his head slightly, offering a soft, nervous apology for arriving late as he looks around the dim room, calling out for a mysterious elder known as the Taoist Master. Suddenly, one of the seemingly lifeless corpses sitting on a central slab flings its sheet aside, revealing a wild-eyed, bearded old man who lets out a booming laugh, teasing the boy for his tardiness. Raika shrieks in absolute terror, his hair standing on end as his heart hammers violently against his chest. Once he catches his breath, Raika explodes in pure frustration, screaming at the old master to stop sleeping on the literal slabs meant for the dead. The old man simply strokes his beard with a mischievous grin, casually firing back that these stone slabs are actually far more comfortable than any of the flimsy beds assigned to the living workers. Brushing off the boy's anger, the old Taoist master gets straight to business, unrolling a long strip of paper on his desk while holding a heavy ink stamp. Raika watches carefully as the elder firmly presses the wooden seal onto the paper, leaving behind a complex, darkly inked mystical talisman. With a sudden burst of theatrical energy, the old master raises a small brass bell, ringing it sharply through the quiet room before swiftly slapping the freshly made paper charm directly onto the forehead of a pale, rigid corpse. The moment the talisman adheres to the dead man's skin, a violent crackle of spiritual lightning erupts behind his eyelids, forcing his eyes to snap open with absolute, terrifying intensity. With a loud wooden thud, the corpse's spine jerks upright, its arms locking straight out in front of its body like an unstoppable machine. Raika watches in silent awe as the old master explains the dark mechanics of soul manipulation, an ancient art originally designed to walk dead bodies back to their ancestral homes, but now cruelly weaponized by their captors to build an endless army of undead construction workers. These reanimated corpses, known as jiangshi, are entirely devoid of human emotion, pain, or exhaustion, allowing them to shatter the natural physical boundaries of a normal living body. They march forward in perfect synchronized rows, easily hosting massive, crushing stone pillars over their shoulders without a single stutter in their step. It is a brilliant yet profoundly sick labor system, ensuring that even after a prisoner dies, their corpse will still be ruthlessly exploited and milked for every single drop of physical labor until the bones entirely turn to dust. Raika stares at the marching undead, silently acknowledging the cold, terrifying efficiency of the Northern Empire's strategy. But the heavy silence is instantly shattered when a massive, portly northern commander bursts through the reinforced doors of the mortuary, his face contorted in an arrogant snarl as he loudly demands the immediate delivery of 10 healthy jiangshi. Raika glares up at the tyrant with burning eyes, his blood boiling as the commander cruelly explains that these corpses are going to be used as living target practice for the raw recruits, helping the new soldiers get perfectly used to the sickening sensation of driving a spear into real human flesh. Suppressing his pure disgust, the old Taoist master hands Raika a thick stack of pre-made talismans, instructing the boy to head deep into the unclassified storage vault to select 10 suitable bodies for the commander's horrific request. Grabbing a small flickering iron lantern, Raika steps away from the main hall and walks through a narrow doorway, his mind spinning with hatred for the monstrous cruelty of the northern forces. He steps into a massive, cavernous back room where dozens of unidentified, heavily mutilated bodies lie tightly packed together on cold stone beds. Walking past the rows of forgotten dead, Raika looks down at the pale faces, whispering a gentle, sorrowful apology to his fallen countrymen who are about to be desecrated on a mock battlefield. He stops dead in his tracks, his eyes widening in complete paralyzed shock as the lantern light illuminates the face of a specific soldier. His breath catches in his throat, his pupils shrinking to tiny pinpricks as he stares down at a familiar suit of armor and a face he recognizes instantly. The heavy rhythmic thud of armored boots echoes through the vault as the impatient northern commander storms into the back room, demanding to know what is taking the brat so long. Raika stands completely frozen by the bedside, his voice trembling in a low whisper as he informs the master that he actually knows this specific man. A brave soldier who was officially reported as missing in action during the final collapse of East Asia. Hearing this, the two northern guards exchange a wicked, sadistic grin, laughing hysterically before ordering Raika to reanimate his old friend immediately so they can punch a few extra holes into his chest for fun. A dangerous, icy darkness washes over Raika's eyes as he stares intently at the face of his fallen comrade. Later that evening, Raika walks silently through the dark, winding alleyways of the camp, carrying a heavy wooden bucket on his back until he arrives at a modest wooden home. He knocks firmly on the wooden door, which creaks open to reveal a tired, somber woman stepping out onto the porch. Bowing his head deeply, Raika holds out both hands, presenting her with a dented, war-torn combat helmet bearing the number 9, delivering a silent, heartbreaking closure to a family whose hero was stolen by the horrors of Anagura. Overwhelmed with grief, the woman sinks directly to her knees on the dirt floor, clutching the helmet tightly to her chest, while her head bows in profound sorrow. Raika offers a final respectful bow to the mourning mother and her child before turning away to walk into the dark, empty streets. As he heads down the path, a familiar voice suddenly shouts out from behind, commanding him to halt. Raika stops and turns his head to find Gashin standing in the middle of the dirt road, breathing heavily with a look of intense, conflicted emotion written all over his face. Standing under the night sky, Gashin looks down with tears welling up in his eyes, choking out a quiet thank you to Raika. Raika lowers his eyes, softly replying that all he could safely recover from the morgue was that single armor helmet. Instantly, Gashin breaks down, covering his face with his arm to hide his tears. Looking at the sobbing youth, a vivid flashback flashes through Raika's mind, recalling the horrific scene earlier inside the morgue when the northern guards aggressively beat Raika to the ground and kicked him, forcing him away from the body he was desperately trying to protect from being used as target practice. The traumatic memory of the assault cuts deep into Raika's thoughts, replaying the moment a bloodied, crying Raika had to be forcefully held back and comforted by the old Taoist master after the guards ruthlessly dragged the fallen soldier's body away. Snapping back to the present night, Gashin wipes away his tears and tries to save face, nervously bringing up their fight from earlier that morning. Raika cuts him off gently, turning his back and walking away while casually answering that he has already forgotten all about it. He pauses to look up at the bright full moon, silently reflecting on how every single captive in this camp carries the exact same unhealed scars. Laying down on the hard wooden floor of his dark, isolated room, Raika stares up at the ceiling as memories of his father flash through his mind. He remembers how Gashin's father was actually the very first person in this harsh land to show kindness to his family, treating them like human beings rather than outcasts. Driven by pure, unfiltered rage, Raika begins a grueling secret training regimen inside his cramped quarters. Stripping off his shirt, he leaps into the air and grabs hold of the wooden rafters, using his raw physical strength to pull his body up repeatedly until his muscles burn and sweat pours down his chest. Day after day, he builds his physical power in total secrecy, carefully mapping out the positions of the guard towers, recording the exact patrol routes of the soldiers, and hoarding hidden weapons and mystical talismans to orchestrate a massive coordinated prison riot. Suddenly, a deafening metallic clang echoes through the entire camp as a guard forcefully strikes a massive bronze bell with a heavy wooden mallet. The rhythmic, explosive alarms shatter the quiet night, sending waves of panic through the residential sectors. Inside his room, a sweat-drenched Raika drops from the rafters, his heart racing as frantic voices begin screaming from the streets, announcing an immediate high-priority emergency assembly for every single prisoner in the camp. Thousands of confused, terrified prisoners crowd into the massive central plaza of the walled fortress, their faces illuminated by the flickering glow of burning torches held by heavily armed guards patrolling the high battlements. A high-ranking northern commander steps forward onto the overlook, his voice booming over the crowd as he issues a shocking decree. He loudly proclaims that, as of tonight, their backbreaking labor has officially earned them the status of citizens, and they are all being immediately evicted from the camp to be forcefully relocated to a brand new settlement. Under the cover of a pitch-black night, a massive winding convoy of thousands of prisoners is marched out of the fortress gates, their lines stretching deep into a rocky mountainous pass surrounded by dense forests. Raika marches alongside the crowd, his brow furrowed in deep suspicion as he looks around, noting the eerie absence of any lights or established roads in the wilderness. He listens closely as a hopeful mother walking beside him cradles her sleeping infant, whispering through tears of joy that they might finally build a normal, peaceful life from scratch. Raika looks at the smiling mother and her baby, a heavy sinking feeling forming in the pit of his stomach. He knows the ruthless nature of the Northern Empire all too well, and there is absolutely no way these tyrants would ever willingly grant freedom to their slaves. His eyes burn with intense fury as he stares ahead into the dark, mountainous terrain, his muscles tensing as he prepares for the absolute worst, knowing that this forced march is a trap, and his ultimate fight for survival has only just begun. Under the cover of a pitch-black night, the massive convoy of thousands of East Asian prisoners is marched deep into a desolate mountain pass. Suddenly, the heavily armored northern guards call a complete halt to the march, shouting aggressively through megaphones. Raika looks around the barren wasteland in deep suspicion, noting the eerie absence of any shelters or established roads. Before anyone can question the location, the guards bark a harsh command, forcing the captives to space themselves out uniformly, leaving a strict 10-cubit gap between every single person to completely prevent private conversations. The thousands of captives shuffle around in confusion, separating from one another across the empty dirt plain. Raika instantly deduces the true, calculated motive behind this strange arrangement. By forcing everyone to stand exactly 3 meters apart, the Empire isn't just stopping simple chatter. They are completely destroying the prisoners' ability to whisper, plan a rebellion, or coordinate a breakout. Realizing the deadly trap forming around them, Raika tenses up, his hand slowly sliding toward the hidden tool tucked behind his back as he desperately wonders what kind of horror their captors are about to unleash. Suddenly, a majestic figure riding a massive warhorse emerges along the high cliffside, flanked by rows of elite soldiers holding glowing torches aloft against the night sky. Raika squints through the darkness, wondering if this grand person is merely a high-ranking military commander. But another captive completely corrects him in sheer horror. That man isn't a general. It is the supreme ruthless ruler of the northern nations himself. The king dismounts from his horse and steps to the edge of the ridge, his piercing gaze sweeping over the massive grid of spaced-out captives. He begins a dramatic, sweeping speech that carries clearly across the quiet plain. With a chilling, cold composure, he asks the crowd how they perceive him tonight, asking if they view him as a hated enemy general, a brutal thief who snatched away their peaceful lives, or the monster responsible for slaughtering their families. Gashin and the surrounding prisoners listen in tense, rigid silence, their blood running cold. In a shocking turn of events, the Supreme King drops directly down to the dirt, crouching into a deep, humbling bow right in front of his captives. The entire crowd watches with wide, completely paralyzed eyes as the absolute ruler of a conquering empire openly lowers himself to slaves. With a voice dripping with emotion, the king offers a formal apology, claiming that he holds the highest, most sacred respect for human life. Standing up from his bow, the king raises his index finger directly toward the heavens, his face contorted in an intense display of conviction. He proclaims that all human life holds the exact same value, whether it belongs to his own noble citizens or the captives of East Asia. The captives look up at the stars in confusion, wondering what the king means by swearing to the polar star. Suddenly, Raika's pupils shrink to tiny pinpricks as his military instincts kick in, sensing a catastrophic, lethal change in the air above them. Without warning, the king unleashes a terrifying, hyper-destructive technique, drawing his weapon with blinding speed to execute a massive horizontal slash. A colossal, blinding crescent wave of energy erupts from his blade, slicing through the air across the entire plane at a fixed height. Measuring the trajectory in a split second, Raika realizes the energy wave is flying exactly at a height of 4 cubits, meaning it will cleanly decapitate anyone standing upright. With a frantic, desperate scream, Raika hurls himself flat into the dirt, shrieking for everyone to hit the ground. The blinding supersonic wave of energy roars directly over the heads of the crowd. generating a violent rushing gale of wind that whips across the plain. The prisoners who manage to drop down survive, while the rest of the spaced-out crowd stands completely frozen, their hair blowing wildly from the sheer pressure of the blast. The young mother, Gashin, and an elderly man look out into the distance in absolute stunned silence, completely uninjured but entirely paralyzed by the display of godlike power. A heavy, breathless silence grips the plain until the quiet night is suddenly pierced by the loud, rhythmic crying of a baby. Raika pushes himself up from the dirt, his face covered in sweat as he looks back to see the young mother standing safely upright. However, as the mother looks down at her arms, her expression turns entirely blank. The supersonic blade of energy had sliced clean through the air at exactly 4 cubits, the precise height where she was cradling her infant. The crying instantly stops as the top half of the baby's blanket slides away, leaving the horrifying reality of the tyrant's calculated mass execution completely bare. The hyper-destructive blade of energy shears through the unsuspecting crowd with terrifying absolute precision. Heads are cleanly severed from their shoulders in a single fraction of a second, suspended in the air for a horrifying moment before dropping heavily into the blood-soaked dirt. The high-contrast impact frames illuminate the pitch-black night as the bodies of the East Asian captives are systematically cut down, their lives snuffed out simultaneously by a ruler who claimed to respect them. The barren plain transforms into a literal sea of slaughter. The strict 10-cubit spacing rule wasn't designed to stop conversations. It was a meticulous tactical layout to ensure that thousands of people could be decapitated simultaneously without their collapsing bodies getting in the way of the blade. Rich or poor, young or old, educated or illiterate. Anyone standing over 4 cubits tall is instantly executed without discrimination. Raika screams in pure, visceral horror as he looks out at the carnage, finding Gashin's severed head resting in a pool of fresh blood right before his eyes. On the ridge above, the Tyrant King stands completely unmoved, casually sheathing his lethal weapon with a smug, self-righteous smirk as the echoes of his victim's screams fade into the night. Raika falls to his knees in the blood-stained dirt, his mind fracturing from the sheer weight of the tragedy. In his head, the disembodied voices of the people he tried to save echo all at once. Grandpa, Gashin, and the grateful mother, all whispering their final thanks to the boy who brought them a brief moment of comfort before the end. But the horror is far from over. Before Raika can even process the mass execution, the air grows freezing cold and an ominous anomaly manifests directly over the execution field. Raika's single eye dilates in pure primitive terror as a massive, swirling vortex of absolute darkness tears wide open in the night sky. Long, shadowy tendrils stretch out from the center of the pitch-black void, hovering over the freshly slaughtered bodies like a monstrous, living nightmare. The black void unleashes hundreds of whipping, ink-like tentacles that surge downward toward the earth. Raika stands paralyzed, trembling and sweating as he desperately questions if he is trapped inside a waking nightmare. Suddenly, one of the thick, shadowy appendages drives directly into Gashin's headless torso. But it doesn't tear the flesh. Instead, it physically wrenches a glowing written paper talisman straight out from deep within the open wound. Raika's breath catches in his throat as the sickening truth of the king's plot is finally laid bare. The mass execution wasn't a punishment, it was a harvest. The thousands of shadowy tentacles act as a massive conduit, simultaneously ripping the artificial soul talismans out of every single fallen worker to forcibly fuse their life forces together. Raika covers his mouth, silently weeping and pleading for the nightmare to stop as the souls of his countrymen are desecrated and stolen before his very eyes. The thousands of stolen souls fuse together inside the vortex, morphing the sky into a grotesque, towering eldritch entity made of writhing flesh, rows of jagged teeth, and giant, unblinking eyeballs. The Empire is processing human lives like raw factory materials to build an ultimate weapon. Suddenly, the piercing cry of a baby shatters the air, drawing Raika's gaze to the ground. Right next to him, a massive round meat monster with a gaping maw snaps its jaws shut, ruthlessly swallowing a fallen captive whole. The newly formed flesh monsters begin pacing across the battlefield, consuming everything in their path. But amidst the horror, a miracle appears. The crying infant is still alive, having been held just below the lethal 4-cubit line. Gritting his teeth, Raika hurls himself forward through the dirt, scooping the baby tightly into his arms before launching into a full sprint. He glances back in absolute terror as a massive, spherical meat beast with giant, bulging eyes hops directly after him, its blood-soaked tongue hanging out as it closes the distance. Raika slides desperately into a dark ditch, pulling the 2 starving children and the crying infant tight against his chest to shield them from the monsters. Surrounded by darkness, the weeping children cling to him, finding a brief, warm sanctuary amidst the absolute ruin of their world. Tears of pure frustration and grief stream down Raika's face as he looks at his trembling hands, realizing his grand escape plan failed completely, and a dark, unhinged resolve begins to warp his expression. A blinding, dangerous light erupts in Raika's eyes as his grief transforms into an absolute, terrifying rage. He didn't swear an oath to the stars or a fake king, he swore an oath to himself. Drawing a massive heavy iron cleaver from his gear, Raika stands tall in the open field, shielding the 3 crying children behind his legs. A massive, multi-layered mouth lined with rows of jagged teeth lunges down from the darkness, ready to swallow everything whole. Raika barks a frantic command, forcing the crying kids to retreat into the shadows while he intentionally exposes himself as bait. He locks eyes with the beast's giant tracking eyeball, screaming out a fierce challenge to draw the monster's primitive hunger entirely onto himself. With a sudden burst of speed, Raika leaps straight toward the gaping maw of the beast, raising his heavy iron meat cleaver high above his head. He drops down with crushing physical force, burying the thick blade directly into the creature's skull with a sickening wet crunch. A massive wave of dark blood sprays across the battlefield as Raika screams out a primal battle cry, putting every single ounce of his remaining strength into the desperate strike. But a regular blade cannot kill what is already dead. Even though Raika's strike completely tears the creature's skull open and spills its internal organs onto the dirt, the undead monstrosity doesn't even flinch. Before he can recover from the swing, the shadows twist as a second colossally large mouth rips open directly in front of him. The children scream out in pure horror as the massive jaws snap shut, biting down violently onto Raika's arm with crushing force. Raika is violently thrown across the rocky plain, his body crashing heavily into the hard ground. He lies motionless in the dirt, blood pooling beneath his clothes from the deep, jagged lacerations carved into his chest. The terrified children run to his side, weeping and begging him to wake up as his breathing turns shallow. But there is no time to rest. Through the heavy mist, the silhouettes of 2 more massive meat beasts emerge, closing in on the helpless kids. Up on the high ridge, the Tyrant King sits calmly on his horse, a mocking, sadistic smile crossing his face as he enjoys the suffering below. Raika glares up at him through a mask of his own blood, his mind racing against the clock. Normal weapons are useless because you cannot kill what is already dead. Staring at his bleeding hands, a sudden radical revelation strikes Raika's mind. Remembering the ancient laws of soul manipulation he learned inside the camp mortuary. With 0 options left, Raika makes an absolute heartbreaking sacrifice. Using a heavy length of rope, he binds the 3 weeping children securely to his back, locking them against his body. His face twists into a grim expression of absolute focus as he reaches into his vest and pulls out the mystical paper talismans he smuggled from the morgue. He knows the price of the technique he is about to trigger, but to save these innocent lives, he is fully prepared to pay it. Raika launches into a full sprint across the craggy cliffside, carrying the weight of all 3 children on his back as the monsters snap viciously at his heels. He remembers his father's teachings from the ancient military treatises. When facing an opponent that cannot die, engaging them in battle is absolute tactical madness. The ultimate plan isn't to defeat the beasts, but to break away from them entirely and stop fighting an unwinnable war. The ground violently shakes as 3 colossal meat monsters charge directly behind him, tearing up the earth as they close the distance. Raika pushes his muscles to their absolute limits, but his human body is rapidly failing from blood loss and exhaustion. He can hear the heavy thudding of their footsteps right on his heels, realizing with cold certainty that running blindly through the wasteland will never be enough to keep these children alive. Suddenly, the path ends entirely as Raika reaches the edge of a sheer, bottomless cliff. The children scream out in pure panic as they look down into the rocky abyss below, begging him to stop. But Raika doesn't slow down. As he approaches the ledge, his hands move with blinding speed, weaving the complex forbidden hand seals of the soul technique to channel every ounce of his spiritual energy directly into the paper talisman. With a fearless roar, Raika leaps completely off the edge of the cliff, plunging straight into the bottomless abyss with the children wrapped in his arms. As they freefall through the night sky, a terrifying ring pattern ignites inside his left eye. With a blood-soaked smirk of absolute defiance, Raika slams the mystical paper talisman directly onto his own forehead, willingly sacrificing his humanity to transform his own living body into an unstoppable, unfeeling undead Jiangshi. Free-falling through the cold night air, Raika and the 3 children, bound tightly to his back, plummet directly toward the canyon floor. Right behind them, the massive, bloated meat monsters mindlessly follow them over the ledge, crashing violently into the jagged rocks below. The impact is catastrophic, causing the mutated, flesh-grafted bodies of the abominations to completely explode into a rain of dark blood and bone fragments, leaving the children gasping for air at the bottom of the trench. Trudging deeply into the dense forest, Raika carries the children to safety as the phantom voices of his fallen countrymen finally fade into the quiet trees. He whispers a silent, bleeding apology to the dead, knowing he has freed their stolen flesh from the Empire's grotesque machinery. The children weep tears of pure joy, celebrating their miraculous survival and thanking their hero as the bleeding on his chest strangely stops. But as they look up to ask his name, Raika's eyes slide shut and his body turns completely cold, his consciousness slipping away into a dark, empty void. Deep within a boundless, pitch-black spiritual plane, Raika's drifting soul encounters a glowing memory of his late father. The brilliant military strategist sits silently before a mountainous stack of old books, his back turned to his son. Raika's spirit cries out in pure, agonizing frustration, weeping before the shadow of his guide as he questions if his reckless sacrifice was a true victory, or just another tragic gamble that cost him everything. The warm, comforting hand of his father's spirit reaches out through the blinding light, gently patting the boy's head. He reassures Raika that despite his cold exterior, he possesses a rare, beautiful kindness, calling him the son he is most proud of. Raika reaches out his hands, desperately begging the spirit not to leave him behind in the dark, but his father's image completely dissolves into a brilliant, explosive flash of white spiritual energy, forcing his soul back toward reality. With a violent gasp, Raika's eyes snap wide open as he bolts upright, coughing up fluid next to a crackling campfire inside a hidden stone cave. The cold mountains and the prison camp are completely gone. Sitting directly across from him in the shadows is a mysterious, elegantly dressed stranger, wearing a modern business suit and long earrings, casually turning off a handheld video game console. With a cold, analytical smile, the strange gentleman welcomes the boy back to the land of the living, announcing that this is only the absolute beginning of his destiny as the first chapter comes to an epic, mind-bending close.